The History of Poetry in Latin American Traditions. Chapter 1. Indigenous Voices and Oral Traditions in Latin America. The rich tapestry of Latin America is woven not only through its diverse landscapes but also through the intricate threads of oral traditions that have been passed down through generations. From the vast Amazon rainforest to the high Andean peaks, indigenous cultures across Latin America have nurtured a wealth of oral narratives, myths, and storytelling practices that embody their history, cosmology, and profound connection to the natural world. This exploration delves into the vibrant oral traditions of indigenous cultures in Latin America, seeking to unveil the cultural richness, diversity, and enduring significance of their spoken narratives. Latin America is a mosaic of indigenous cultures, each with its distinct languages, customs, and worldviews. The oral traditions of these diverse communities reflect the linguistic tapestry of the region, with languages ranging from Quechua and Aymara in the Andes to Nahuatl in Mexico and Guarani in Paraguay. The sheer linguistic diversity underscores the depth of indigenous cultures, each contributing to the multifaceted oral heritage that has been an integral part of their identity for centuries. Within this linguistic diversity, oral traditions serve as a unifying force, providing a shared repository of knowledge, values, and beliefs. The spoken word becomes a living thread that weaves together the collective consciousness of indigenous communities, fostering a sense of continuity with ancestral wisdom and a profound connection to the land. Oral traditions in indigenous cultures are not merely repositories of stories, they are dynamic means of cultural transmission. The elders, storytellers, and shamans play a pivotal role in passing down knowledge through the spoken word, ensuring that the cultural heritage is not lost but rather perpetuated through generations. Storytelling serves as an educational tool, imparting lessons about morality, survival, and the relationship between humans and nature. The narratives often carry moral allegories, guiding the listeners on how to navigate the complexities of life, the importance of community, and the significance of preserving ecological balance. In many indigenous societies, the passing on of oral traditions is an interactive and participatory process. Through call and response techniques, rituals, and communal gatherings, the oral narratives become immersive experiences, allowing individuals to engage with their cultural heritage on a profound level. Central to many indigenous oral traditions are cosmological narratives that explain the origin of the world, the creation of humanity, and the interconnectedness of all living beings. These creation myths are not mere stories but cosmogonic maps that delineate the sacred geography of the indigenous worldview. In the Andean region, for example, Quechua and Aymara cosmologies often involve narratives of ancestral deities shaping the landscape, mountains, and rivers. These stories not only articulate the spiritual dimensions of the natural world but also provide a foundation for understanding the cultural significance of sacred sites. Similarly, among the Maya in Mesoamerica, the Popol Vuh narrates the creation of humans from maize and their connection to the divine. These creation myths are not relegated to the realm of the past but are woven into the fabric of daily life, guiding rituals, agricultural practices, and communal ceremonies. Indigenous oral traditions in Latin America are deeply rooted in a profound connection to nature. Animism, the belief that everything in the natural world possesses a spirit, is a recurring theme in these narratives. Mountains, rivers, animals, and plants are not merely elements of the landscape, they are living entities with their own agency and significance. The Yoruba people in Cuba, for instance, embody their connection to nature through oral traditions that involve storytelling, dance, and music. The natural elements become characters in these stories, reflecting a worldview where humans coexist with the spirits of the land. In the Amazon rainforest, indigenous communities such as the Shipibo-Conibo engage in oral traditions that depict a symbiotic relationship with the plant and animal life surrounding them. The narratives not only emphasize the practical knowledge of medicinal plants but also convey a spiritual understanding of the interconnectedness of all living things. Many oral traditions are intricately linked to rituals and ceremonies, serving as a sacred bridge between the mundane and the supernatural. The recounting of myths, the singing of traditional songs, and the performance of ceremonial dances become integral components of these rituals, imbuing them with cultural and spiritual significance. Among the Mapuche people in Chile and Argentina, the tradition of machitún involves oral recitations and rituals performed by maquis, spiritual leaders. These ceremonies, often accompanied by storytelling, are essential for healing, divination, and maintaining the balance between the spiritual and material realms. In the Quechua-speaking communities of the Andes, rituals such as the Capac Raymi, Inca festival, involve oral performances that recount the history of the Inca civilization and reinforce the collective identity of the community. The rituals become living theaters where the narratives are enacted, bringing the stories to life in the hearts and minds of the participants. Throughout history, indigenous oral traditions have been a powerful means of resistance against colonialism, cultural erasure, and social marginalization. The oral narratives embody a resilience that has withstood centuries of external pressures, preserving cultural identity and offering a platform for resistance and affirmation. The Mapudungun language, spoken by the Mapuche people, has been a key element in preserving their oral traditions and cultural heritage. Despite the historical attempts at linguistic and cultural suppression, Mapudungun continues to be spoken in ceremonies, rituals, and daily life, keeping the oral traditions alive as a testament to the Mapuche resistance. In Mexico, the Nahuatl language has been a vessel for the oral transmission of traditions such as the Cantares Mexicanos, a collection of Aztec poems. The Nahuatl language, with its poetic expressions and complex symbolism, has been a resilient force in preserving the indigenous cultural identity against the backdrop of colonization. While rooted in ancient wisdom, indigenous oral traditions in Latin America are not static, they evolve and adapt to contemporary contexts. Many contemporary indigenous poets and storytellers draw inspiration from their oral heritage, infusing traditional narratives with new forms of expression, addressing current challenges, and engaging with a global audience. Contemporary poets like Natalio Hernández from the Mazateco community in Mexico use their indigenous languages to create verses that reflect both traditional knowledge and the realities of the present. Through their poetry, they navigate the complexities of identity, language, and the impact of globalization on indigenous communities. In urban settings, indigenous poets such as hip-hop artist Mayor Advertencia Lyrica, of the Zapotec people in Oaxaca, fuse oral traditions with contemporary music genres. Their work becomes a medium through which the struggles, aspirations, and resilience of indigenous communities find expression in the rapidly changing landscapes of urbanization. The pre-Columbian societies of the Americas were vibrant tapestries of cultural diversity, each weaving its unique narrative through the threads of oral tradition and poetic expression. Poetry, deeply intertwined with the daily lives, rituals, and myths of these societies, held a profound significance that went beyond mere entertainment. It was a medium for cultural preservation, community bonding, and a way to commune with the spiritual realms. In this exploration, we delve into the rich tapestry of pre-Columbian poetry, examining the pivotal role of oral storytellers, the poetic expressions embedded in rituals and myths, and the enduring impact of these traditions on the fabric of indigenous societies. In the absence of written language, pre-Columbian societies relied on oral traditions as the primary means of transmitting knowledge, history, and cultural values from one generation to the next. At the heart of this oral tradition were storytellers, revered individuals who held the responsibility of preserving the collective memory of their communities through the spoken word. These oral storytellers, often known by different names such as shamans, bards, or wise elders, played a crucial role in the preservation of poetry. Through their narratives, they wove together the threads of creation myths, genealogies, and the histories of their people. The oral tradition, with its fluidity and adaptability, allowed for a living memory, one that could evolve and respond to the changing dynamics of the community while retaining the essence of cultural identity. Poetry in pre-Columbian societies was not confined to casual storytelling but was intricately interwoven with rituals and ceremonies that marked significant milestones in the lives of individuals and communities. These rituals served as occasions for the expression of poetic beauty, often involving songs, chants, and dances that celebrated the cyclical rhythms of nature, agricultural cycles, and spiritual communion. Among the Aztec people, poetry was an integral part of ceremonial life. The Cantares Mexicanos, a collection of Aztec poems, reflects the poetic expressions embedded in rituals. These ceremonial songs were performed during important events, including rites of passage, agricultural ceremonies, and religious festivals. The poetry heightened the spiritual and emotional dimensions of the ceremonies, creating a sacred atmosphere that connected individuals with the cosmic forces governing their lives. Pre-Columbian societies were enveloped in a rich tapestry of myths, each a poetic exploration of the origins of the world, the gods, and the relationship between humanity and the divine. These myths, conveyed through poetic narratives, not only provided answers to fundamental questions but also shaped the cultural, social, and spiritual frameworks of indigenous societies. In the Inca civilization, the Quechua-speaking people held the Huarochiri manuscript, a Quechua mythic narrative. The poetic expressions within this manuscript recounted the adventures of deities, the creation of the world, and the moral lessons embedded in these cosmic tales. The myths, communicated through poetic language, served as both educational tools and spiritual guides, offering a poetic cosmos that enriched the understanding of existence. Poetry was not reserved for grand ceremonies or sacred myths, it permeated the very fabric of daily life in pre-Columbian societies. From lullabies sung to cradleboards to songs recounting the activities of daily labor, poetry was a means of expressing the beauty, struggles, and joys of everyday existence. Among the Maya, poetry was intertwined with the quotidian aspects of life. The Popol Vuh, a sacred Maya text, contains poetic expressions that extend beyond the mythic realm. Songs and verses within the Popol Vuh resonate with the rhythms of agricultural activities, weaving a poetic narrative that connects the mundane with the spiritual. In the Andean region, the Quechua language served as a medium for expressing the nuances of daily life through poetry. Whether through the weaving of intricate textiles or the cultivation of terraced fields, the Quechua people incorporated poetic expressions into their everyday activities, elevating the mundane to the realm of art and beauty. Languages in pre-Columbian societies were not merely utilitarian tools for communication, they were vessels of poetic expression, each word carrying layers of meaning, symbolism, and cultural significance. The Quechua language, with its intricate grammar and nuanced expressions, allowed for the creation of poetic verses that conveyed the depth of Andean worldviews. Maya hieroglyphics, with their intricate glyphs and symbols, served as a visual language for expressing poetic concepts. The Maya inscribed their poetry on stelae and codices, creating a marriage of visual art and poetic expression. The hieroglyphic writing system was a medium through which the Maya could capture the beauty of their language in a tangible, enduring form. Poetry in pre-Columbian societies was not confined to spoken words, it found resonance in the rhythms of musical instruments, enhancing the emotional and spiritual impact of poetic expression. Drums, flutes, rattles, and other instruments became integral components of poetic performances, creating a multisensory experience that engaged both the auditory and spiritual senses. Among the Aztecs, the huehuetl, a large drum, accompanied poetic recitations during ceremonies. The rhythmic beats of the drum synchronized with the spoken words, creating a dynamic and entrancing performance. The use of musical instruments added layers of meaning to the poetry, transforming it into a multisensory art form that resonated with the participants. The poetic forms in pre-Columbian societies were characterized by distinct structures and devices that added a rhythmic flow to the spoken word. Parallelism, a poetic device where similar or contrasting ideas are expressed in parallel clauses, was a prevalent feature in many indigenous poetic traditions. In the Quechua language, parallelism was a fundamental aspect of poetic expression. The repetition of sounds, words, or ideas created a rhythmic cadence that enhanced the oral performance. This poetic structure was not only aesthetically pleasing but also facilitated memorization, contributing to the preservation of oral traditions. Poetry in pre-Columbian societies was not solely an aesthetic pursuit, it carried an ethical dimension that guided the behavior and values of the community. The ethical teachings embedded in poetic narratives served as a moral compass, offering insights into virtuous living, social harmony, and the responsibilities of individuals within the collective. Among the Nahua people, the Aztecs emphasized the ethical teachings contained in their poetry. The Flower Songs, a collection of Nahuatl poems, conveyed moral lessons about humility, resilience, and the impermanence of life. The poets were not only storytellers but also ethical guides, using the indigenous poetry of Latin America unfolds as a rich mosaic, woven from the diverse linguistic and cultural landscapes that stretch across the continent. From the highlands of the Andes to the lush Amazon rainforest, each indigenous community contributes a unique thread to the poetic tapestry, reflecting the intricacies of their languages, cultural practices, and spiritual beliefs. In this exploration, we journey through the diverse linguistic and cultural landscapes that have given rise to the multifaceted expressions of indigenous poetry in Latin America. In the high-altitude regions of the Andes, Quechua and Aymara stand as linguistic pillars that have nurtured vibrant poetic traditions. Quechua, spoken by communities in Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, and parts of Colombia and Argentina, is a language characterized by its melodic sounds and nuanced expressions. Aymara, primarily spoken in the Andean highlands of Bolivia, possesses its own poetic beauty, reflecting the unique worldview of its speakers. Quechua poetry often weaves intricate metaphors drawn from the natural environment, where mountains, rivers, and agricultural terraces become poetic symbols. The language's complex structure allows for poetic devices like parallelism, repetition, and alliteration, enhancing the rhythmic and aesthetic qualities of the verses. Aymara poetry, with its distinct linguistic features, engages with the cosmological beliefs of the Andean people, exploring the interconnectedness of humans, nature, and the spiritual realm. In the heart of Mesoamerica, the Nahuatl language serves as a conduit for the poetic expressions of the Nahua people. Spoken by communities in Mexico and parts of Central America, Nahuatl carries within it the echoes of the ancient Aztec civilization. The poetry of the Nahua people, often characterized by its philosophical depth and rich symbolism, draws inspiration from their complex cosmology. The Cantares Mexicanos, a collection of Nahuatl poems, stands as a testament to the poetic achievements of the Aztecs. The verses explore themes of love, loss, and the impermanence of life, while also serving as a repository of historical and cultural knowledge. Nahuatl poetry, with its intricate metaphors and rhythmic patterns, captures the essence of the natural world and the profound spirituality embedded in the Nahua worldview. The Maya civilization, with its majestic cities and sophisticated hieroglyphic writing system, has left an indelible mark on the poetic landscape of Latin America. The Maya people, residing in present-day Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador, speak various Maya languages, including Quechua, Cuequi, and Caciquel. Maya poetry, expressed through written texts and oral traditions, delves into the intricacies of creation myths, historical narratives, and the daily lives of the Maya people. The Popol Vuh, a sacred text written in Quechua, encapsulates the poetic richness of Maya literature. Through hieroglyphics, inscriptions, and oral recitations, the Maya people have preserved a poetic legacy that harmonizes with the natural world and the spiritual dimensions of their existence. In the vast expanses of Paraguay, the Guarani people enrich the mosaic of indigenous poetry with the Guarani language. Guarani, spoken by communities in Paraguay, Brazil, Argentina, and Bolivia, carries within it the cultural heritage of the Guarani people, who have navigated the challenges of colonization while preserving their linguistic and poetic traditions. Guarani poetry often reflects the deep connection between the Guarani people and the lush landscapes they inhabit. The language lends itself to the creation of vivid images and metaphors that capture the essence of the natural world. Guarani poets explore themes of love, spirituality, and the enduring resilience of their culture, creating verses that resonate with both the historical struggles and contemporary aspirations of the Guarani people. The Amazon rainforest, a vast and biodiverse region, is home to numerous indigenous communities, each with its own linguistic tapestry. The diversity of languages in the Amazon basin contributes to a kaleidoscope of poetic expressions that reflect the unique relationships these communities share with their environment. Languages such as Tupinamba, Ningatu, and Tucano are spoken by different indigenous groups in the Amazon. The poetry of these communities often revolves around themes of ecological harmony, animism, and the profound spiritual connection between humans and the natural world. The oral traditions of Amazonian communities, carried through generations, embody a poetic ethos that celebrates the intricate interplay of life within the rainforest. In the southern reaches of Latin America, the Mapuche people contribute the Mapudungun language to the vibrant mosaic of indigenous poetry. Spoken in Chile and parts of Argentina, Mapudungun reflects the cultural resilience of the Mapuche, who have endured centuries of change while preserving their linguistic and poetic heritage. Mapuche poetry often draws inspiration from the landscapes of the Andean foothills and the Araucaria forests. The language allows for the creation of verses that evoke the rhythms of nature, the spirits of the land, and the historical struggles of the Mapuche people. Through poetic expressions, Mapudungun serves as a medium for preserving the stories of resistance, identity, and cultural continuity. While written texts provide insights into the poetic traditions of some indigenous communities, many maintain vibrant oral traditions where poetry thrives as a living, spoken art form. The diversity of these oral traditions encompasses various poetic devices, including repetition, parallelism, and metaphors, which enhance the aesthetic qualities of the verses. Chapter 2: Colonial Encounters and Baroque Expression. The impact of European colonization on Latin American poetry during the colonial period is a complex tapestry woven with threads of cultural collision, adaptation, resistance, and transformation. As European powers, primarily Spain and Portugal, extended their influence across the Americas, indigenous poetic traditions encountered the imposition of European languages, religious doctrines, and cultural norms. This encounter sparked a poetic dialogue that reflected the tensions, syncretism, and evolving identities of Latin American societies. In this exploration, we delve into the multifaceted impact of European colonization on the poetic landscape of colonial Latin America. One of the most immediate consequences of European colonization was the imposition of European languages, particularly Spanish and Portuguese, upon the diverse linguistic landscape of indigenous cultures. This linguistic shift had profound implications for the indigenous poetic traditions that were deeply rooted in their native languages. The Spanish language, with its rich literary heritage, became a dominant medium for expression in colonial Latin America. Indigenous poets, grappling with the complexities of linguistic assimilation, often adopted Spanish as a tool to preserve and adapt their poetic voices. This linguistic fusion gave rise to a unique form of poetry that blended European and indigenous elements, reflecting the hybrid nature of cultural identities in the colonial context. The European colonization of Latin America brought with it the imposition of Catholicism, intertwining the spiritual fabric of indigenous societies with European religious doctrines. This syncretism of religious and mythical imagery manifested in the poetry of the time, where indigenous poets navigated the intersection of their traditional beliefs and the introduced Catholic narratives. In the Andean region, for example, the Quechua-speaking people engaged in a poetic dialogue that melded their ancestral cosmology with Christian themes. The result was a unique blend of religious and mythical imagery that permeated colonial Quechua poetry. This syncretic approach allowed indigenous poets to preserve their cultural and spiritual heritage within the constraints of the European colonial framework. The colonial period witnessed the emergence of a distinctive poetic style known as colonial Baroque, characterized by its ornate language, complex metaphors, and intricate use of symbolism. This style, influenced by European Baroque traditions, found expression in the works of both European and indigenous poets. In Mexico, Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, a self-taught nun, produced remarkable colonial Baroque poetry. Her verses, marked by intellectual depth and linguistic sophistication, engaged with themes of love, faith, and the complexities of colonial society. While Sor Juana was of European descent, her contributions exemplify the cross-cultural currents that shaped colonial Latin American poetry. The Nahuatl-speaking people of Mesoamerica, whose rich poetic traditions predated the arrival of Europeans, experienced a transformation as their language and culture encountered Spanish colonization. Nahuatl poetry, once expressed through hieroglyphic codices and oral traditions, adapted to the European alphabet, resulting in a hybrid form of expression. The Florentine Codex, compiled by Franciscan friar Bernardino de Sahagun and his Nahua informants, stands as a testament to the complex interplay of indigenous and European influences. This monumental work, written in both Spanish and Nahuatl, captures the Nahuatl poetic tradition as it grapples with the religious, cultural, and linguistic changes brought about by colonization. While European colonization posed significant challenges to indigenous poetic traditions, it also became a site of cultural survival and resistance. Indigenous poets, through their verses, resisted cultural erasure and sought to preserve their languages, histories, and identities. The Inca Garcilaso de la Vega, known as El Inca, stands as a notable figure in this resistance. Born to an Inca princess and a Spanish conquistador, El Inca wrote in both Spanish and Quechua, bridging the linguistic and cultural divide. His works, such as Comentarios Reales de los Incas, reflect a nuanced exploration of the collision between indigenous and European cultures. Indigenous poets, in navigating the linguistic and cultural upheavals of colonization, demonstrated a remarkable power of adaptation. Many embraced the European poetic forms, such as the sonnet and the villancico, infusing them with indigenous themes, symbolism, and linguistic elements. Gonzalo Pizarro, an indigenous poet of the 17th century, employed the sonnet to articulate the anguish and resilience of indigenous peoples in the face of colonial oppression. His verses, written in Spanish, revealed a sophisticated engagement with European literary forms while preserving the core of indigenous experiences. The emergence of a new social and cultural identity, known as Creole, further influenced the trajectory of colonial Latin American poetry. Creole poets, born in the Americas to European descent, grappled with questions of belonging, cultural hybridity, and the complexities of their dual heritage. Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, though of Creole descent, exemplified this internal cultural dialogue. Her poetry engaged with the tensions between her European heritage and the realities of colonial Latin America. The Creole identity, emerging as a distinct cultural force, left an indelible mark on the poetry of the time. The African diaspora, brought to the Americas through the transatlantic slave trade, introduced yet another layer of cultural diversity to colonial Latin American poetry. Afro-Latin American poets, often writing in Spanish or Portuguese, incorporated elements of African oral traditions, rhythms, and mythologies into their verses. Especially in regions like Brazil and the Caribbean, Afro-Latin American poets contributed to the rich mosaic of colonial poetry. They engaged with themes of resilience, identity, and the complex interplay between African and European cultural elements. The oral traditions of African descent, including the use of rhythm and call and response, found expression in the poetic compositions of these writers. The colonial period also witnessed the emergence of satirical poetry as a powerful tool for social critique. Poets, both European and indigenous, used satire to lampoon the excesses of colonial power, the contradictions of religious piety, and the social hierarchies that defined colonial societies. The Peruvian indigenous poet Juan del Valle y Cavides, for instance, employed satirical verses to critique the moral decay and hypocrisy of colonial society. His Inundation Castalida exemplifies the use of humor and irony to address the social and moral complexities of the time. The collision of indigenous and European poetic traditions in the crucible of colonial Latin America gave rise to a fascinating and distinctive literary style known as colonial baroque. This complex and ornate form of expression, characterized by its intricate language, elaborate metaphors, and interplay of cultural influences, stands as a testament to the dynamic interweaving of diverse traditions. In this exploration, we delve into the intersection of indigenous and European poetic traditions that catalyzed the emergence of the colonial Baroque style, examining its features, influences, and enduring legacy. The encounter between indigenous and European cultures in colonial Latin America was a profound and transformative moment that resonated across artistic, linguistic, and spiritual domains. European colonizers brought with them a rich literary heritage deeply rooted in the classical traditions of Greece and Rome, as well as the Baroque sensibilities that flourished during the 17th century. Indigenous communities, with their diverse linguistic and poetic traditions, offered a wealth of cultural expressions shaped by their close connection to nature, spirituality, and communal life. One of the most striking outcomes of the intersection of indigenous and European poetic traditions was linguistic fusion and hybridity. The imposition of European languages, primarily Spanish and Portuguese, on the linguistic landscape of the Americas led to a fascinating amalgamation of words, phrases, and expressions. Indigenous poets, grappling with the complexities of linguistic assimilation, incorporated their native languages into the European forms, giving rise to a hybrid linguistic landscape. The result was a rich tapestry of linguistic fusion, where indigenous words and concepts found their place alongside the intricate structures of European languages. This linguistic hybridity became a hallmark of colonial Baroque poetry, creating a unique mode of expression that transcended cultural boundaries. Religious syncretism was a central aspect of the intersection of indigenous and European poetic traditions. European colonizers, particularly the Spanish, brought with them the fervent Catholicism of the Counter-Reformation. Indigenous communities, with their intricate pantheons and spiritual practices, found parallels and divergences with the Christian narratives. Colonial Baroque poetry became a space where these religious syncretisms unfolded. Indigenous poets, drawing from their ancestral cosmologies, interwove indigenous deities, spirits, and mythical figures with Christian saints, angels, and biblical themes. This syncretic approach transformed the religious imagery of colonial Baroque poetry into a rich tapestry where diverse spiritual traditions converged. Colonial Baroque poetry embraced a profusion of cultural symbolism and imagery drawn from both indigenous and European traditions. Natural elements, such as flora and fauna, were infused with symbolic meanings that resonated with the spiritual and cultural contexts of both worlds. Mountains, rivers, and celestial bodies became poetic symbols, often carrying dual meanings that reflected the complex interplay of indigenous and European narratives. For example, the Andean region, with its majestic peaks and fertile valleys, became a symbolic canvas for colonial Baroque poets. Mountains, revered in indigenous cosmologies, took on new meanings when juxtaposed with European notions of divine hierarchy and transcendence. This fusion of cultural symbolism elevated the aesthetic and spiritual dimensions of colonial Baroque poetry. The Baroque aesthetic, characterized by its ornate and extravagant style, found a natural home in the poetic expressions of colonial Latin America. European Baroque literature, with its emphasis on elaborate metaphors, intricate language, and emotional intensity, resonated with the complexities of the colonial experience. Indigenous poets, adapting to these European forms, incorporated Baroque aesthetics into their verses. Colonial Baroque poetry became a showcase of linguistic virtuosity, employing extravagant metaphors, elaborate wordplay, and complex syntactical structures. This poetic ornamentation reflected the ornate architecture and artistic sensibilities of the Baroque era, creating a fusion of linguistic and visual richness. Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, a 17th-century Mexican nun and poet, emerged as a luminary of colonial Baroque poetry. Of Creole descent, Sor Juana navigated the complexities of her identity within the colonial framework. Her writings epitomized the Baroque style, with its intellectual depth, complex metaphors, and engagement with themes of love, faith, and the human condition. Sor Juana's Inundation Castalida and other works showcased the fusion of indigenous and European influences. Her erudition, expressed in both Spanish and indigenous Nahuatl, exemplified the linguistic hybridity characteristic of colonial Baroque poetry. Sor Juana's ability to seamlessly weave together diverse cultural and linguistic elements contributed to the rich legacy of Baroque poetry in colonial Latin America. In the Andean region, Quechua-speaking poets engaged in a dynamic poetic dialogue that reflected the intersection of indigenous and European traditions. Quechua poetry, deeply rooted in the oral traditions of the Andean people, underwent a transformation as it encountered European literary forms. The Quechua-speaking poet Felipe Guamin Poma de Ayala, known for his extensive manuscript Nueva Crónica y Buen Gobierno, demonstrated a unique blend of indigenous and European influences. Guamin Poma utilized the Quechua language to express his perspectives on colonial society, offering a critical and satirical commentary on the power dynamics between indigenous communities and the colonial administration. Colonial Baroque poetry often delved into mystical dimensions, exploring the realms of spirituality, transcendence, and the human connection to the divine. Indigenous and European mystical traditions converged in the poetry of figures like Eso Awana, where the contemplation of divine mysteries became a central theme. Indigenous poets drew from their shamanic and spiritual practices, infusing colonial Baroque poetry with a profound connection to nature and the cosmos. The synthesis of mystical dimensions contributed to the transcendent quality of Baroque poetry, offering readers a glimpse into the complexities of the spiritual landscape shaped by the encounter of indigenous and European cultures. Colonial Baroque poetry became a medium for social critique and satire, providing a space for indigenous and Creole poets to comment on the complexities of colonial society. Satirical verses lampooned the hypocrisy of the ruling classes, the excesses of colonial power, and the contradictions between professed Christian values and the realities of colonial life. Juan del Valle y Cavides, an indigenous poet from Peru, used satire to critique the moral decay and social inequalities of colonial society. His work, such as Inundation Castalida, exemplified the use of humor and irony as a tool for social commentary within the Baroque aesthetic. In the tapestry of Latin American literature, Eso Awana Ins de la Cruz emerges as a luminary, a beacon of intellectual brilliance whose work transcends time and space. Born in 1648 in what is now Mexico, Eso Awana navigated the complex sociocultural landscape of colonial Latin America. Her poetry, essays, and plays not only showcase her extraordinary linguistic abilities but also embody the intricate blending of cultural influences within the colonial context. As we embark on an exploration of Eso Awana's works, we delve into the rich mosaic of her creations, highlighting the intersections of indigenous, European, and Creole elements that define her literary legacy. Eso Awana's journey into the world of letters began at an early age. Recognized for her prodigious intellect, she entered the court of the Viceroy of New Spain at the tender age of 8, showcasing her exceptional abilities in languages, philosophy, and the sciences. Yet, the cloistered life beckoned to her, and at the age of 20, she entered the convent of Santa Paula in Mexico City. Within the convent's walls, Eso Awana cultivated her voracious appetite for knowledge, creating a literary oeuvre that would reverberate through the centuries. Eso Awana's poetry is characterized by the ornate flourishes and complexity of the Baroque style, a hallmark of the 17th century literary milieu. Within this Baroque aesthetic, Eso Awana masterfully wove together the linguistic influences of her time, Spanish, Latin, and Nahuatl, creating verses that resonated with a profound understanding of the intricacies of language. Her Creole identity, born of Spanish and indigenous ancestry, added layers of complexity to her work. The blending of European and indigenous elements in her poetry became a distinctive feature, reflecting the cultural syncretism that defined colonial Latin America. Eso Awana's linguistic prowess allowed her to seamlessly move between languages, creating a linguistic tapestry that mirrored the multicultural reality of her environment. The religious syncretism inherent in Eso Awana's works is a testament to the collision of indigenous and European spiritual landscapes. In the poem Inundation Castalida, she draws upon classical mythology, Christian theology, and indigenous symbolism, merging these diverse elements into a cohesive whole. The poem serves as a spiritual allegory, exploring themes of knowledge, virtue, and divine grace. Eso Awana's engagement with religious themes extends beyond mere synthesis; it becomes a dialogue between worlds. The Baroque cathedrals of European Christianity coalesce with the sacred spaces of indigenous cultures, creating a poetic realm where spiritual dimensions intertwine. Eso Awana's status as a woman within the cloistered walls of the convent added another layer of complexity to her work. In the poem Hombres Necios que Accuseas, she addresses the gender dynamics of her time, offering a scathing critique of the hypocrisy and double standards faced by women. This poem stands as a pioneering feminist text within the colonial context, showcasing Sor Juana's courage in challenging the patriarchal norms that constrained women. Her exploration of gender roles goes beyond critique; it becomes a contemplation on the nature of knowledge itself. In her famous response to the Bishop of Puebla, known as Respuesta a Sor Filatia de la Cruz, Sor Juana defends the right of women to pursue intellectual endeavors. Her eloquent defense of women's right to knowledge is a powerful articulation of gender equality that reverberates across centuries. Sor Juana's intellectual curiosity extended beyond religious themes into the realms of science, literature, and philosophy. In Carta Athenagorica, the Athenagoric letter, she engages in a playful and erudite exploration of various knowledge domains. The poem is a testament to her deep engagement with classical learning and her desire to carve out a space for intellectual inquiry within the cloister. Her secular themes often traverse the realms of love, politics, and the human condition. In Redondillas, a series of short verses, Sor Juana contemplates the complexities of love and desire. The poem transcends conventional notions of courtly love, delving into the tumultuous and often contradictory nature of human emotions. Throughout her works, Sor Juana incorporates indigenous imagery that echoes the cultural resonance of the Americas. In Primero Sueño, First Dream, she explores the indigenous cosmologies that informed her worldview. The poem unfolds as a journey through dreamscapes, where gods, spirits, and celestial bodies merge in a kaleidoscopic tapestry. Her use of indigenous imagery is not a superficial nod to her heritage but a profound engagement with the cultural fabric of the Americas. Sor Juana's verses become a bridge between worlds, where the symbols of pre-Columbian cultures coexist with the religious iconography of European Christianity. Sor Juana's poetry extends beyond the confines of the convent to engage with the social and political realities of colonial society. In Carta Athenagorica, she satirically critiques the societal norms that restricted women's access to education, using wit and humor to underscore the absurdities of gender inequality. Her ability to use satire as a tool for social critique is further evident in her secular plays, such as Los Empinos de una Casa, The Trials of a Noble House. In this play, Sor Juana employs humor and irony to dissect the rigid class structures and societal expectations of her time. Sor Juana's legacy reverberates through the annals of literary history, leaving an indelible imprint on Latin American literature and feminist thought. Her bold exploration of complex themes within the colonial context set a precedent for future generations of writers and thinkers. The blending of cultural influences in Sor Juana's works serves as a poignant reminder of the intricate interweaving of indigenous, European, and Creole elements in the colonial experience. Her poetry becomes a testament to the resilience of cultural identities in the face of colonial hegemony, reflecting the complexities of a society in transition. Sor Juana's works continue to resonate in contemporary discourse, transcending the confines of her historical context. Scholars, feminists, and literary enthusiasts alike revisit her writings, finding in them a source of inspiration and a foundation for ongoing conversations about gender, identity, and cultural hybridity. Chapter 3: Romanticism and National Identity. The 19th century Romantic movement, a literary and artistic revolution that swept across Europe, found fertile ground in Latin America, giving rise to a distinctive poetic expression deeply intertwined with the quest for national identity. As the region grappled with the aftermath of colonial rule and sought to define itself in the wake of independence, poets embarked on a journey of introspection, exploring the landscapes, cultures, and histories that shaped their nations. In this exploration, we delve into the intricacies of the Romantic movement in Latin American poetry, tracing its connections to the quest for national identity and the emergence of a unique literary voice. The Romantic movement, which emerged in Europe in the late 18th century, reached Latin America in the early 19th century. The movement was characterized by a celebration of individualism, a fascination with nature, a rejection of rationalism in favor of emotion and intuition, and a keen interest in national identity. As Latin American nations grappled with the aftermath of colonialism and sought to define themselves as independent entities, the Romantic ethos resonated deeply with the cultural and political zeitgeist. Romantic poets in Latin America often turned to the vast and varied landscapes of their homelands as symbols and metaphors for the national identity they sought to construct. The majestic Andes, the lush Amazon rainforest, the sweeping pampas, these geographical features became both muse and mirror, reflecting the poet's aspirations for their nations. In his epic poem La Araucana, Chilean poet Alonso de Ercilla celebrated the natural beauty of the Andes and paid homage to the indigenous Mapuche people, using the landscape as a backdrop for a narrative that resonated with the spirit of romantic nationalism. Similarly, in Argentina, Esteban Echeverría's poem La Córtova drew on the Pampas landscape to explore themes of captivity and national identity. Romantic poets in Latin America, inspired by the romantic fascination with folklore and the exotic, often turned to indigenous themes and cultural roots to construct a distinctive national identity. The richness of pre-Columbian cultures, the myths, and legends of indigenous peoples became a wellspring of inspiration for poets seeking to forge a connection between their nation's past and present. In Mexico, the poet and politician Guillermo Prieto drew on Aztec mythology in his works, weaving indigenous themes into his poetry. The quest for a genuine national identity led poets to explore the cultural wealth that predated European colonization, seeking to reconcile indigenous heritage with the complexities of the contemporary socio-political landscape. The Romantic poets of Latin America were not merely celebrants of nature and indigenous culture, they were also keen observers of the political and social realities of their time. The quest for national identity was closely tied to the desire for political autonomy and social justice. Romantic poets often used their verses to critique the lingering vestiges of colonialism, the social inequities of the post-independence era, and the struggles for political sovereignty. Cuban poet José María Heredia, for instance, composed poems that critiqued Spanish colonial rule and called for the liberation of Latin American nations. The Romantic movement provided a platform for poets to engage with the political currents of their time, using their verses as a medium for social critique and a call to action. The Romantic fascination with intense emotions found expression in themes of love, not only in the personal realm but also in the context of patriotic fervor. Romantic poets often extolled the virtues of romantic love as intertwined with love for the homeland. The concept of amor patrio, or patriotic love, became a recurring motif in Romantic poetry. In his poem A Mi Bandera, To My Flag, Venezuelan poet Andrés Bello fused romantic love with national loyalty, using the imagery of the flag as a symbol of both personal and collective devotion. This fusion of romantic and patriotic sentiments elevated the emotional resonance of the poetry, reinforcing the idea that personal and national identities were inseparable. The Romantic movement in Latin America was not confined to individual poets, it flourished within intellectual circles and literary societies. These groups became crucibles of artistic and ideological exchange, fostering a collective endeavor to define and articulate the national identity. The generation of 1837 in Ecuador, led by Juan Montalvo and Juan León Mera, exemplifies this collaborative spirit. Their poetic and literary works, including Mera's Himno Nacional del Ecuador, National Anthem of Ecuador, reflected a shared commitment to the romantic ideals of national identity and cultural expression. While Romantic poets in Latin America were deeply rooted in their local landscapes and cultural contexts, they were also influenced by European Romanticism. The works of European Romantic poets like Byron, Wordsworth, and Lamartine resonated with their counterparts in Latin America, leading to a blending of local and global influences. This cultural hybridity is evident in the works of Cuban poet José María Heredia, who spent much of his life in exile in the United States and Europe. His poetry reflects a synthesis of European Romantic aesthetics and the realities of Latin American landscapes, creating a unique poetic voice that encapsulates the spirit of the age. The Romantic movement in Latin America witnessed a resurgence of epic poetry, with poets attempting to capture the grandeur of national narratives and historical events. Epic poetry became a vehicle for articulating a collective identity, weaving together myths, history, and aspirations into a cohesive national narrative. In Chile, the poet and diplomat Bernardo O'Higgins, inspired by the European Romantic epic tradition, penned La Victoria de Yungay, The Victory of Yungay. The poem celebrated the triumph of Chilean forces over the Peruvian-Bolivian Confederation, using the epic form to elevate a historical event into a symbol of national resilience and identity. The impact of the 19th-century Romantic movement in Latin American poetry extends beyond the immediate era, leaving an indelible mark on the region's literary and cultural landscape. The quest for national identity, which animated the Romantic poets, became a foundational element in the ongoing conversation about Latin American identity. The fusion of indigenous themes, political critique, romantic love, and cultural hybridity embedded within the Romantic poetry of this era created a template for future generations of Latin American writers. The legacy of the Romantic movement can be traced in the works of subsequent literary movements, influencing the development of literature. In the complex tapestry of Latin American poetry, luminaries like José Martí and Andrés Bello emerge as poetic architects of a sense of belonging and independence. The 19th century, marked by struggles for liberation and the quest for national identity, provided a fertile ground for poets to weave verses that transcended mere linguistic beauty. Martí, a Cuban national hero, and Bello, a key figure in the intellectual circles of Spanish America, employed their poetic prowess to articulate a profound sense of belonging, independence, and cultural identity. In this exploration, we delve into the poetic realms of Martí and Bello, dissecting their verses to understand how they became conduits for the aspirations of their nations. José Martí, often referred to as the apostle of Cuban independence, was more than a poet. He was a visionary, a revolutionary, and a champion of Latin American identity. Born in Cuba in 1853, Martí witnessed firsthand the oppressive realities of Spanish colonial rule. His poetry became a powerful instrument in the fight for Cuba's independence, blending the beauty of language with a fervent call to arms. Martí's verses, characterized by their lyrical intensity and emotional depth, served as a rallying cry for Cuban independence. In his famous poem Versos Sencillos, Simple Verses, he articulates a profound sense of belonging to the Cuban soil. The opening lines, Yo soy un hombre sincero de donde crece la palma, I am a sincere man from the land where the palm tree grows, establish a direct connection between the poet and the Cuban landscape. Martí's poetry is infused with a deep sense of belonging, not just to the physical geography of Cuba but to its people, its struggles, and its aspirations. The landscape becomes a metaphor for the collective Cuban identity, and Martí's verses capture the essence of a nation yearning for freedom. His poems celebrate the richness of Cuban culture, paying homage to its music, its flora, and its people. In doing so, Martí elevates the concept of belonging beyond a mere geographical attachment. It becomes a spiritual and cultural allegiance to the essence of Cuba. The lines Cultivo una rosa blanca en julio como en enero, I cultivate a white rose in July as in January, from Versos Sencillos reflect this poetic cultivation of symbols, where the white rose becomes a metaphor for purity, independence, and resilience. Martí's verses not only express a sense of belonging but also serve as a call to arms for the cause of independence. His poem La Bayamesa, which later became the Cuban national anthem, is a rousing anthem of freedom. The refrain Al comate, cord, Bayameses, to combat, run, people of Bayamo, became a battle cry during the Cuban War of Independence. In Versos Sencillos, Martí addresses the theme of freedom directly, expressing his desire to die as a free man. The lines Cuyo vivo en la cárcel, Cuyo vivo en el presidio, for I live in prison, for I live in the penitentiary, reflect the personal sacrifice Martí was willing to make for the cause. The poem becomes a testament to the price of independence, encapsulating Martí's commitment to the liberation of his homeland. While José Martí was shaping the poetry of Cuban independence, Andrés Bello, a contemporary figure from Venezuela, was contributing to the intellectual landscape of Spanish America. Bello was not just a poet, he was a polymath, a scholar, and a key figure in the intellectual circles of his time. His poetry, while not overtly revolutionary, played a significant role in articulating a sense of belonging and cultural identity for the nations emerging from colonial rule. Bellow's experience was one of an intellectual in the service of knowledge and education. His poem Silva a la Agricultura de la Zona Torrida delves into the richness of the American tropics, celebrating the fecundity of the land and its potential for growth. In these verses, belonging extends beyond national borders to a shared identity based on a common geography and environment. Andrés Bello's contributions to language and linguistics were as significant as his poetic endeavors. His work on the grammar and philology of Spanish became foundational for the study of the language in Latin America. In this sense, Bello's sense of belonging was intimately tied to linguistic identity. In his poem Alocution a la Poesia, Bello celebrates the beauty of the Spanish language itself. The lines En tu idioma, O divina poesia, yo te canto, in your language, O divine poetry, I sing to you, underscore the linguistic identity as a source of pride and cultural richness. Bello, through his poetry and linguistic scholarship, contributed to the articulation of a Latin American identity that transcended political boundaries. Andrés Bello's poetry reflects a cosmopolitan vision that embraces a broader Latin American identity. His long poem La Agricultura de la Zona Torrida celebrates the agricultural bounty of the American tropics, weaving together imagery from various regions. Bello's perspective is not confined to the nation-state, it encompasses the entire American continent. In the intricate tapestry of Latin American history, poetry has played a profound and transformative role in shaping cultural consciousness and fostering a sense of unity during times of political and social change. From the struggles for independence to the tumultuous 20th century marked by revolutions, dictatorships, and social movements, poets across the region have wielded the power of language to articulate the aspirations, grievances, and collective identity of their societies. This exploration delves into the multifaceted ways in which Latin American poetry has been a beacon during times of change, offering solace, resistance, and a shared voice that transcends borders. During periods of political oppression and social injustice, Latin American poets have emerged as powerful voices of resistance. The ability of poetry to encapsulate dissent, critique, and dreams of a better future makes it a potent tool for those challenging oppressive regimes. Poets become the conscience of their societies, offering a nuanced and often veiled critique that transcends censorship. In the mid-20th century, during the era of military dictatorships in countries like Chile and Argentina, poets like Pablo Neruda and Juan Gelman used their verses to resist authoritarianism. Neruda's Canto General, an epic poem that traverses the history of Latin America, became a symbol of resistance against oppressive regimes. Gelman's poetry, forged in the crucible of political turmoil, bore witness to the pain and resilience of those who resisted injustice. Latin American poetry has been instrumental in navigating the complexities of cultural identity, particularly in the aftermath of colonization. Poets grapple with questions of hybridity, mestizaje, and the search for an authentic identity that goes beyond colonial impositions. The exploration of indigenous roots, African heritage, and the melding of diverse cultural elements finds resonance in the verses that delve into the intricate layers of Latin American identity. In her poem Me Gritaron Negra, They Shouted Black at Me, Venezuelan poet Victoria Santa Cruz confronts issues of racial identity and discrimination, asserting pride in her Afro-Peruvian heritage. This poetic confrontation with cultural identity is not just a personal journey but a collective reckoning with the legacy of colonialism. The waves of social movements that swept through Latin America, advocating for workers' rights, land reform, and social justice, found powerful expression in poetry. The verses of poets became a testament to the struggles of the people, documenting the passion, pain, and aspirations of those at the forefront of change. In Nicaragua, during the Sandinista Revolution, poets like Ernesto Cardenal and Gioconda Belli penned verses that captured the revolutionary fervor and the dreams of a more equitable society. Cardenal's Cantico Cosmico, Cosmic Canticle, became a poetic hymn of the Sandinista movement, blending the cosmic with the political in an exploration of a new, liberated reality. In the aftermath of traumatic events, poetry has served as a healing balm for societies grappling with collective wounds. The expression of pain, loss, and the search for meaning in the face of tragedy finds solace in the carefully crafted verses that traverse the depths of human emotion. Chilean poet Gabriela Mistral, a Nobel laureate, addressed the anguish of loss in her poem Lagar. Written in the context of her country's social upheaval, the poem explores the metaphor of the winepress, Lagar, to delve into the crushing weight of suffering. Mistral's poetry exemplifies the role of poets as healers, helping societies come to terms with their traumas through the medium of language. Latin American poets have often responded to political realities with a keen aesthetic sensibility. The fusion of beauty and political critique creates a unique space where the form and content of the poetry become intricately linked. This aesthetic response challenges simplistic narratives, offering a nuanced exploration of the complexities of power, resistance, and societal transformation. The works of Nicaraguan poet Rubén Darío, a key figure in the Modernismo movement, exemplify this aesthetic response. Dario's poetry, while celebrated for its linguistic beauty and formal innovation, also engages with the political realities of his time. His poem To Roosevelt critiques U.S. imperialism and asserts Latin American cultural independence, showcasing how poetry can be a vehicle for aesthetic and political expression. Poetry becomes a unifying force, forging a sense of unity among diverse communities and nations. During times of political upheaval, when divisions threaten to tear societies apart, poets offer a shared language that transcends borders and binds people together in a collective narrative. In the context of the Cuban Revolution, the poetry of Nicolas Guillen became a powerful force for unity. Guillen, often referred to as the national poet of Cuba, celebrated the spirit of the revolution in verses that resonated with the aspirations of the Cuban people. His poem Tengo, I Have, became an anthem of the revolutionary movement, embodying a collective consciousness that transcended individual experiences. Latin American poets often intertwine the personal and the political in their verses, creating a rich tapestry where individual experiences become emblematic of larger societal struggles. The blending of personal narratives with political critique adds depth and emotional resonance to the poetry, making it a mirror that reflects the complexities of lived realities. Chilean poet Violeta Parra, known for her contributions to the Nueva Canción Chilena movement, masterfully wove the personal and the political in her song lyrics and poetry. Her work, such as Gracias a la Vida, Thanks to Life, is imbued with a deep sense of introspection and gratitude while also expressing the pain and hope of a nation in tumultuous times. In addition to individual poems, poets in Latin America have often penned manifestos that articulate their vision for societal transformation. These manifestos become rallying points for movements and platforms for poets to assert their role in shaping cultural consciousness. The Crepusculario and Residencia en la Tierra by Chilean poet Pablo Neruda are often considered poetic manifestos. Neruda's verses, infused with surreal imagery and passionate declarations, articulate a vision that encompasses both the personal and the collective. His poetry becomes a manifesto for a new way of seeing and understanding the world, blending aesthetics with a profound social conscience. Chapter 4: Modernismo and Avant-Garde Movements. In the waning decades of the 19th century and the dawning years of the 20th, a literary and cultural movement known as Modernismo swept across Latin America, transforming the poetic landscape and leaving an indelible mark on the region's literary history. Led by luminaries like Rubén Darío and José Asunción Silva, Modernismo heralded a new era of poetic innovation, characterized by a departure from traditional forms, an embrace of symbolism, and a fervent quest for aesthetic beauty. This exploration traces the development of Modernismo, unraveling its origins, key features, and the enduring impact of its pioneers on the evolution of Latin American poetry. Modernismo emerged as a response to the perceived stagnation and lack of innovation in the literary traditions of Latin America. The movement sought to break away from the rigid structures of Romanticism and Realism, introducing an aesthetic revolution marked by a renewed focus on beauty, form, and linguistic precision. Modernista poets rebelled against the utilitarian and didactic functions of literature, advocating for a more ornate and symbolic expression. At the forefront of the Modernismo movement stood Nicaraguan poet Rubén Darío, often hailed as the father of Modernismo. Dario's seminal work, Azul, Blue, published in 1888, marked a paradigm shift in Latin American poetry. In Azul, Dario embraced a melange of influences, including French symbolism and Parnassianism, as well as Spanish and Latin American literary traditions. Dario's poetry embodied the tenets of Modernismo, elevating form, musicality, and aesthetic pleasure to the forefront. His language was opulent, his imagery evocative, and his themes often mythic and symbolic. In Sonatina, one of his iconic poems, Dario employed delicate symbolism and musicality to create a lyrical masterpiece that captured the essence of Modernista ideals. One of the defining features of Modernismo was the incorporation of symbolism and musicality into poetry. Poets sought to transcend the limitations of language and convey profound emotions and ideas through carefully crafted symbols and rhythmic structures. The use of musical elements, such as alliteration and internal rhyme, became a hallmark of Modernista poetry. José Asunción Silva, a Colombian poet considered a pioneer of Modernismo, explored these elements in his collection Poema del Cid, Poem of the Cid. Silva's poetry, notably his nocturnes, exemplifies the movement's emphasis on musicality. His verses are a symphony of sounds, rhythms, and images, reflecting the Modernista obsession with creating a sensory experience for the reader. Modernismo poets were enamored with the exotic, the distant, and the decadent. They often drew inspiration from exotic locales, distant historical periods, and mythologies, weaving them into their verses to create an otherworldly atmosphere. The exoticism and decadence present in Modernista poetry were a departure from the immediate and the mundane, transporting readers to dreamlike realms. Dario's rhymes, and prosas profanas, profane prose, are steeped in decadent aesthetics, with themes of languor, longing, and the exotic. His poem A Roosevelt is a critique of U.S. imperialism and an exploration of the clash between modernity and Latin American identity. Dario's engagement with the exotic and decadent became a signature element of Modernismo. Aesthetic beauty was the lodestar of Modernismo. Poets sought to create verse that was not merely informative but a work of art in itself, delighting the senses and inspiring emotions. The pursuit of beauty was manifested in meticulous attention to language, innovative metaphors, and the use of exquisite images. The Argentine modernista Leopoldo Lugones echoed this pursuit of beauty in his work, incorporating rich visual and sensory elements. In Lunario Sentimental Almanac, Lugones explored themes of love, desire, and beauty through lush and vivid imagery. The beauty, for modernista poets, lay not only in the subject matter but in the craftsmanship of the language itself. Modernista poets were pioneers of formal experimentation, breaking away from the rigid structures of traditional verse. They explored new poetic forms, experimented with rhyme schemes, and employed innovative metrics. The modernistas embraced the free verse, allowing for greater flexibility and creativity in the construction of their verses. Rubén Dario's exploration of free verse in Azul and José Asunción Silva's intricate play with metrics in Nocturnos demonstrated the movement's commitment to formal innovation. These poets were not bound by the constraints of classical structures, freeing them to explore new avenues of expression. The Modernismo movement was not confined to the literary salons of a few countries, it had a profound impact on the broader cultural and regional identities of Latin America. Poets from various countries contributed to the movement, each infusing their work with unique cultural elements, regional flavors, and linguistic nuances. In Cuba, Julián del Casal was a key figure in the Modernista movement, blending Cuban cultural references with the aesthetics of the movement. Casal's Snow, while embracing the Modernista penchant for exoticism, also incorporated elements of Cuban identity and landscape, showcasing how Modernismo became a platform for diverse regional expressions. While the heyday of Modernismo is often associated with the late 19th and early 20th centuries, its influence endured well into the 20th century and beyond. Modernismo laid the groundwork for subsequent literary movements, shaping the evolution of Latin American poetry for decades to come. The legacy of Modernismo is both celebrated and critiqued in literary circles. While some laud its contribution to the elevation of Latin American poetry to international prominence, others critique its elitism and perceived detachment from the socio-political realities of the time. In his later years, Rubén Darío embraced more socially engaged themes, reflecting a shift in perspective. This evolution suggests that the Modernistas were not oblivious to the socio-political currents of their. In the early to mid-20th century, the winds of artistic change that swept through Europe, particularly in the form of avant-garde movements, found fertile ground in Latin America, igniting a transformative period in the region's poetry. Influenced by European movements such as Surrealism, Dadaism, and Futurism, Latin American poets embarked on a journey of experimentation with language, form, and themes. This exploration delves into the impact of European avant-garde movements on Latin American poetry, examining the ways in which poets embraced and adapted these influences to create a rich tapestry of innovative and often revolutionary verse. Surrealism, with its emphasis on unlocking the power of the unconscious mind and exploring the realm of dreams, resonated deeply with Latin American poets seeking to break free from traditional poetic constraints. The Surrealist movement, pioneered by André Breton in Europe, found enthusiastic adherents in Latin America, where poets used its techniques to delve into the mysteries of the subconscious. In Chile, poet Vicente Huidobro, a central figure in the creation of the Creationismo movement, engaged with Surrealist ideas in his collection Althazar. The poem Canto I introduces readers to a dreamlike landscape where traditional rules of language and reality are disrupted. Huidobro's linguistic experimentation and use of vivid, symbolic imagery showcase the influence of Surrealism in creating an otherworldly poetic experience. Dadaism, born out of the disillusionment with the rationality that led to World War I, was characterized by a spirit of rebellion, absurdity, and a rejection of conventional norms. Latin American poets, ever attuned to the socio-political upheavals of their time, found a kindred spirit in the Dadaist ethos. Chilean poet Nicanor Parra, a pivotal figure in Latin American poetry, embraced the Dadaist spirit in his anti-poems. Parra's rejection of traditional poetic language and his use of everyday speech aligned with the Dadaist disdain for established artistic conventions. Their anti-poems were a manifestation of poetic rebellion, challenging the very foundations of what poetry could be. Futurism, with its celebration of speed, technology, and the dynamism of modern life, resonated with poets in Latin America who were witnessing the rapid transformations of their societies. The futurist emphasis on breaking with the past and embracing the energy of the present found echoes in the works of poets who sought to capture the pulse of their changing environments. Uruguayan poet and novelist Delmira Agostini, influenced by futurist ideas, experimented with themes of modernity, desire, and female sensuality. Her collection El Rosario de Eros, Eros Rosary, reflects the futurist fascination with progress and the sensory experiences of urban life. Agostini's verses, while rooted in Latin American themes, embrace the dynamic spirit of futurism. Vicente Huidobro, a Chilean poet and one of the founders of the Creationismo movement, blended elements of Surrealism with his own innovative vision. Creationismo sought to create a new poetic language, divorcing poetry from representation and focusing on the creation of pure, imaginative images. Huidobro's poem Art Poetica, Poetic Art, outlines the principles of Creationismo, emphasizing the importance of creating a world of new realities through language. Huidobro's embrace of the avant-garde, coupled with his commitment to the creation of an original poetic language, contributed to the rich experimentation that characterized Latin American poetry during this period. In Brazil, the modernist movement of the early 20th century, heavily influenced by European avant-garde ideas, sought to break with traditional artistic forms. Poets like Morio de Andrade, Oswald de Andrade, and Manuel Bandeira were at the forefront of this literary revolution. Oswald de Andrade's Manifesto Antropófago, Cannibal Manifesto, epitomized the modernist spirit, drawing on Dadaist and Surrealist influences. The manifesto proposed a metaphorical cannibalism of European cultural influences, advocating for the assimilation and transformation of foreign ideas into a uniquely Brazilian expression. This call for cultural and artistic autonomy aligned with the avant-garde's emphasis on breaking away from established norms. Vicente Huidobro's experimentation extended beyond the realm of language. He also delved into visual poetry, creating artworks that merged visual and linguistic elements. This intersection of poetry and visual art reflects the broader avant-garde interest in expanding artistic boundaries. Huidobro's Tour Eiffel is a notable example of his visual poetry. The poem is presented as a visual composition, with words arranged in the shape of the Eiffel Tower. This integration of language and form exemplifies the avant-garde spirit, where the boundaries between poetry, visual art, and typography blur. Surrealism, with its exploration of the irrational and the subconscious, found a welcoming home in Latin America. The movement provided a platform for poets to engage with the fantastical, the dreamlike, and the symbolic, tapping into the rich cultural and mythological traditions of the region. Chilean poet Pablo Neruda, known for his later association with political poetry, initially experimented with surrealist themes in works like Residencia en la Tierra, Residence on Earth. Neruda's verses delve into the surreal landscapes of the subconscious, drawing on vivid and often disconcerting imagery. His engagement with surrealism underscores the movement's impact on Latin American poetry's thematic and stylistic contours. Peruvian poet Cesar Vallejo, while incorporating avant-garde elements in his work, went beyond formal experimentation to engage deeply with the socio-political realities of his time. Vallejo's poetry is characterized by its fusion of avant-garde techniques with a commitment to addressing social injustices and inequalities. In works like Trilce, Vallejo employed fragmented language and dissonant imagery, echoing surrealist and cubist influences. However, his verses also carried a profound social critique, reflecting his concern. Chapter 5: Contemporary Voices and Global Recognition. In the kaleidoscope of contemporary Latin American poetry, a myriad of voices converges, weaving a rich tapestry that reflects the complexities of the region's cultural, social, and political landscapes. As the 21st century unfolds, Latin American poets continue to draw from a diverse range of influences, embracing themes that resonate with the challenges and triumphs of the present. This exploration ventures into the dynamic world of contemporary Latin American poetry, highlighting the diverse styles, thematic concerns, and innovative expressions that define this vibrant literary landscape. Contemporary Latin American poetry is a celebration of diverse identities, each poet contributing a unique perspective shaped by their cultural heritage, ethnicity, gender, and individual experiences. Poets traverse the intersections of multiple identities, embracing the polyphony of voices that make up the Latin American mosaic. Poets like Gioconda Belli from Nicaragua and Carmen Belosa from Mexico explore the complexities of gender and identity in their work. Belli's poetry, such as The Inhabited Woman, reflects on the lived experiences of women within the socio-political contexts of Latin America. Belosa, known for her narrative and poetic explorations, weaves intricate narratives that delve into gender roles and power dynamics. In a departure from historical marginalization, contemporary Latin American poetry resounds with the voices of indigenous poets who reclaim and celebrate their cultural heritage. Poets such as Natalio Hernandez from Guatemala and Hugo Jaimioy Juajibio from Colombia infuse their work with the rich traditions, languages, and cosmologies of their indigenous roots. Hernandez, a K'Ishmaya poet, addresses themes of identity, resistance, and ancestral knowledge in his poetry. His work often serves as a bridge between traditional indigenous storytelling and contemporary poetic expression. Jaimioy Juajibio, a Nasa poet, engages with the natural world and the spiritual dimensions of his culture, creating verses that echo the rhythms of the land and the wisdom of indigenous traditions. Contemporary Latin American poets navigate the complexities of urban life, offering poignant reflections on the social and political realities of their countries. In the sprawling metropolises, poets capture the pulse of the streets, the struggles of marginalized communities, and the impact of rapid urbanization. The Argentine poet Alejandra Pizarnik, in her collection The Most Foreign Country, explored the alienation and existential crises of urban life. Mexican poet David Huerta, in Incurable, examined the fractured social fabric, addressing issues such as violence and the search for hope in a troubled world. Their works stand as testimonies to the power of poetry to articulate the nuances of contemporary urban experiences. As environmental challenges loom large globally, Latin American poets have turned their attention to the ecological intricacies of their landscapes. Eco-poetry emerges as a significant genre, reflecting a deep connection to the natural world and a sense of urgency in the face of environmental degradation. Chilean poet Raúl Zurita, deeply influenced by the stark beauty of the Atacama Desert, explores themes of nature, violence, and human impact in his work. Zurita's poetry, particularly in Purgatory, engages with ecological concerns, addressing the fragility of the environment and the need for environmental stewardship. The contemporary era witnesses Latin American poets navigating the digital landscapes and grappling with the impact of technology on human connection and expression. Poets like Maria Rivera from Mexico and Eduardo Espina from Uruguay explore the intersections between the digital realm and poetic imagination. Rivera, known for her dynamic performance poetry, incorporates multimedia elements and digital platforms into her work. She engages with technology not only as a medium of expression but as a thematic exploration of its influence on contemporary identity and relationships. Espina, in his collection Oeste Habla del Gato de Pelia, explores the technological shifts and their implications for language and communication in the digital age. Migration, whether forced or voluntary, has been a defining theme in contemporary Latin American poetry. Poets grapple with the experiences of displacement, diaspora, and the search for a sense of belonging in new lands. The Salvadoran American poet Javier Zamora, in his collection Unaccompanied, explores the journey of unaccompanied minors crossing borders. His poetry embodies the visceral experiences of migration, drawing from his own life as an undocumented immigrant. Other poets like Ada Limon and Ilya Kaminsky, though not native to Latin America, contribute to the poetic discourse on migration and displacement. Contemporary Latin American poets engage passionately with social justice issues and human rights, using their verses as a medium for advocacy and critique. The legacy of historical struggles against authoritarian regimes informs the poetic narratives that demand accountability and justice. The work of Chilean poet Raúl Zurita, who endured imprisonment and torture during the Pinochet regime, reflects a commitment to the pursuit of justice and memory. Zurita's poetry, particularly in Purgatory, serves as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring quest for truth and justice. A notable feature of contemporary Latin American poetry is the revival of oral traditions and the rise of performance poetry. Poets are turning to public spaces, spoken word events, and digital platforms to bring their verses to diverse audiences, blurring the lines between literature and performance art. Performance poets like Peruvian Renato Gomez and Colombian Jahel Morgado use their art to engage with social and political issues in a direct and visceral manner. Their performances amplify the emotional impact of their verses, offering a space for communal reflection and dialogue. Contemporary Latin American poetry embraces intersectionality, amplifying voices that traverse various axes of identity, including race, gender, sexuality, and socio-economic background. Poets like Elizabeth Acevedo from the Dominican Republic and Melissa Machado from Cuba bring an intersectional lens to their verses. Acevedo, a renowned slam poet, addresses themes of identity, womanhood, and Afro-Latinidad in her works. Machado, in her collection The Luminous Inescapable, explores the complexities of love, desire, and the intersections of her queer identity within the Cuban context. In the post-World War II era, Latin American poetry underwent a profound transformation, marked by the emergence of new voices, themes, and poetic forms that reflected the complex socio-political realities of the time. This period witnessed a departure from traditional styles, as poets sought innovative expressions to capture the turbulence of a changing world. From the echoes of existentialism to the fervor of political engagement, Latin American poets engaged in a dynamic dialogue that gave birth to a diverse array of voices and forms. This exploration delves into the multifaceted landscape of post-World War II Latin American poetry, examining the key movements, poets, and thematic concerns that defined this era. In the aftermath of World War II, existentialist philosophies that grappled with questions of existence, individualism, and the search for meaning left an indelible mark on Latin American poetry. Poets engaged with existentialist ideas, infusing their work with a sense of existential angst and introspection. The Chilean poet Nicanor Parra, often associated with the anti-poetry movement, reflected existentialist influences in his early work. In poems and antipoems, Parra employed a stark, pared-down language to explore the uncertainties of existence and the absurdity of the human condition. His poems questioned traditional notions of poetry, creating a space for a more direct and stripped-down engagement with the complexities of life. The mid-20th century saw the emergence of the magical realism movement, characterized by the infusion of fantastical elements into everyday settings. While predominantly associated with prose, the magical realist spirit permeated Latin American poetry, particularly in the works of poets like Alejandro Pizarnik from Argentina. Pizarnik, influenced by surrealism and the works of Octavio Paz, embraced a poetic language that blurred the boundaries between reality and fantasy. Her collection Works and Nights weaves dreamlike imagery into verses that explore the intricacies of identity, desire, and the mysteries of existence. Pizarnik's poetry resonates with the magical realist tradition, contributing to the broader literary movement that defined Latin American literature in the post-war period. The 1960s and 1970s marked the boom of Latin American literature, a period characterized by the global recognition of writers who transcended national borders. While closely associated with prose fiction, the boom had a profound impact on poetry, with poets such as Julio Cortázar from Argentina and Carlos Fuentes from Mexico engaging with experimental forms and themes. Cortázar, renowned for his innovative narrative techniques in prose, also experimented with avant-garde poetry. In his collection Final del Juego, End of the Game, Cortázar played with language, structure, and visual elements to create poems that mirrored the disorienting and fragmented nature of contemporary existence. The boom generation poets were instrumental in expanding the possibilities of poetic expression, pushing against established norms and embracing a global literary consciousness. The post-World War II era in Latin America was marked by political upheavals, dictatorships, and social movements. Poets, impassioned by the socio-political realities of their countries, turned to their verses as a means of political engagement and social critique. The Chilean poet Pablo Neruda, a towering figure in 20th-century Latin American literature, exemplified the fusion of political commitment and poetic expression. Neruda's Canto General, an epic poem that traverses the history of Latin America, embodies his engagement with the continent's socio-political struggles. His verses resonate with themes of justice, equality, and the impact of imperialism, reflecting the broader political consciousness of the time. The latter half of the 20th century witnessed the rise of authoritarian regimes across Latin America, leading to periods of censorship, persecution, and exile. Poets became witnesses to the injustices of their time, using their verses to document, resist, and bear witness to the human cost of political repression. The Uruguayan poet Mario Benedetti, who lived through the dictatorship in Uruguay, engaged with witness poetry in works like The Bora's Circus. Benedetti's poetry captured the anguish, resilience, and resistance of individuals facing political persecution. Witness poetry became a powerful form of social critique, highlighting the role of poets as chroniclers of their turbulent times.